Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Well, it's that moment in the year when autumn really kicks in and the leaves tumble and stream off the trees, and it feels like gardening becomes a process of tidying up and packing the garden away for winter. But actually this is a glorious time of year, and the leaves are a glorious harvest. In fact, they're one of my favourite ones, because leaves make leaf mould, and it's so useful as a mulch on borders and as part of your potting compost. Saves you a huge amount of money, and I'll be showing you how to make really good leaf mould later on in the programme. If you get leaves in the borders, they can by and large be left. Clear them from the tops of any herbaceous plants, but they will form a natural mulch. But on paths and on lawns, gather them up and turn what might seem to be a mess to be tidied up into treasure to be stored. On today's programme, Carol engages all her senses as she enjoys the beauty of autumn at Westonbirt, the National Arboretum.
So if you just lean against the tree, close your eyes, and just think about the size of the tree and the size of you.
Oh, you just want to close your eyes and you just want to stay here.
To mark the centenary of the BBC, we celebrate gardening on television.
Take a few pots and fill them with compost.
Take it nice and easy and go and have a cup of tea.
What's going to happen? And it's pumpkin harvest time at Tinsfield in North Somerset.
Our pumpkins and squashes are going to be the real star of our harvest display. We've grown 39 varieties. I'm just really hoping that I've grown enough.
And I shall be bringing in tender plants and looking at the different ways that I can protect them while saving some money. Now I'll take these leaves to the leaf mould bay, which we just stack up over the coming months and then leave. And I really treasure leaf mould. It's undervalued in my opinion, and yet it makes a superb mulch for the borders, and it's an incredible addition to potting compost. Let's just have a look at how we can go from leaves like this to lovely leaf mould. If I leave those, they will rot down, but you can speed up that process. So the first thing is to chop them up, and this does a number of things. One, it increases the surface area, and two, because you've got different leaves, some of which, like these field maple or hornbeam or oak, actually break down quite quickly, but others, like horse or sweet chestnut or sycamore, are thicker and can take longer to break down, so chop them all up. Now, if that sounds as though you need a special bit of kit, you don't, because we mow our leaves. Run the mower over them, and that chops and gathers at the same time. But what we have is dry leaves. And if they're dry, the fungal activity, which is the primary way that leaf mould is made, takes longer to work. Most fungi need moisture to work well. And so you want to wet them. And really they should be wet enough so when you squeeze the leaves, moisture comes out. And if you're putting them into a bin bag, which is a good way of making leaf mould, you just fill the bin bags with chopped leaves, turn over the top. However, always make drainage holes in the bottom. You want them to be moist, but not sitting in a puddle. Now, what you'll end up with in a year's time is that. That has got some leafy elements, but it's broken down, and that is perfect as a mulch. If we sieve this, you get this. And this is what we add to our potting compost. You can see it's this beautiful, silky substance that smells faintly of a wood on a dry November day. And when it dries out, you can see all trace of leaf has gone. It is really good material, which I use in seed compost, I use in potting compost, and nothing else works quite the same way because it has a very loose, open texture and yet retains moisture. So the roots get a really good run, they don't dry out, and it makes a very good substitute for peat where you want that particular texture. Now, Carol has paid a visit to Westonbirt, the National Arboretum, and she had as her guide somebody who gave her a fresh insight on how to fully enjoy the autumn display.
As autumn begins, trees and shrubs across the British Isles begin to exhibit a magnificent display of brilliant crimsons and reds, burnt oranges, acid yellows, a grand finale before the beginning of winter. But there's more to this season than meets the eye. I've come to meet Louise Rounds, one of the guides who are helping visitors experience more than just the colours that autumn brings. Isn't it beautiful?
Oh, this is amazing. Even I can see the colours.
Yeah.
Because I've got a congenital eye condition, which means that I can only see through one eye, and it's like looking down a toilet roll. But if the colours are bright enough, I can see them.
Yeah.
And so autumn is so spectacular here. My sight condition is degenerative, so the beautiful thing about having Axel is he is going to be with me on my journey as I lose more vision.
Aren't people quite surprised at first to find a guide who's partially sighted?
Yes, I mean obviously when you think of a guided tour, you're thinking of looking at things.
Yes.
But our guided tours are slightly different.
Because you are concentrating on all those other senses.
Yeah, and helping,
broadening their experience.
and helping people to use the senses the way that I use my senses and the other visually impaired guides use their senses. We want people to get involved with the trees, we want them to be touching them, we want them to be listening, we want them to smell. It's a wonderfully rich environment, and we're wanting people to understand how important trees are in their lives, and we're wanting them to reconnect with themselves as well as with nature. I mean, over here we've got the most magnificent tree. Most people will look at this and will just see the red colour.
Yeah.
But if you go closer and you start to touch it, you're actually making a physical connection with nature.
There's lichen and then there's
And then
moss
further
further up.
there's moss.
Yeah.
And they all feel different, and it's kind of feathery. See,
Isn't that
they're like little
beautiful?
pom-poms. One of the other things we like to do is if you get a piece, you just brush it against your face. Because the skin in your face is very sensitive and has more nerve endings. And that gave a really tickly experience that you don't necessarily
lovely.
get through your fingers.
Oh,
Do you want to have a go?
Got to try it. I've got a lovely, and I find myself straight away just closing my eyes. And it's just you and the tree and the moss, isn't it?
So here is a really nice, quiet, enclosed area with an open space in the middle. And just beyond here is the bird hide.
Right.
So this is where we like to do our listening experience. If you cup your hands round your ear, you can get a louder sound. If you close your eyes, it's more intense. So we just listen. And then what we do is we turn around 180 degrees.
Yeah.
So what you were hearing in your right ear, you're now hearing in your left ear.
Does it? But all of these make different noises, don't they?
They do.
According to the size they are.
Tell you what we ought to do.
What's that?
It's autumn. We ought to go and walk in the leaves and make
Yeah.
some noise.
Got to make a crunch. Just lovely being under here, isn't it?
It's gorgeous. But if you take nice deep breaths now,
Yeah.
you might, if you're lucky, get a really good scent of the Katsura.
So that's Sarcidiphyllum japonicum. It's one of my favourite trees. But it's not much to look at the moment, is it?
Even though it doesn't look much, isn't that gorgeous? I
Yeah,
love it. I love it.
Well, it's almost edible, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
like
Candy floss.
toffee apples.
Yes,
Isn't it?
the fun fair.
Yeah. Oh, it's coming with us. Oh, lovely, isn't it? That's Western red cedar. That's Thuya.
Now, what you're smelling there is
Yeah.
the scent on the air.
Yeah.
But if you crush these leaves, now I get a different scent. You might not. Try and see.
Oh, for me it's the same scent, but it's much, much more concentrated.
See, I get a citrusy smell from this.
And I think it's spicy.
Sense of smell is really interesting. It's the only sense that is fully formed in the fetus.
Yeah.
And it's your most dominant sense until you're about 10 years old, when your vision takes over. And that's why when you smell something later in life, you often go back to a childhood memory.
Because it has to be the most evocative of all the senses, doesn't it? Your sense of smell. It's just lovely.
So, this way. Right, you are now inside my favourite tree in the Arboretum. This is another Western red cedar.
But is this all one tree? I mean, look how many huge branches there are extending everywhere.
Yep, we are standing in the middle of a tree. I absolutely love this feeling. So if you just lean against the tree, close your eyes, and just think about the size of the tree and the size of you. And see if you can feel the warmth coming from the tree. And the Native American peoples believe that you can gain strength from this tree by just leaning against it.
You just want to close your eyes and you just want to stay here.
Axel and I have spent much time here. It is a place to recharge, reconnect. It is. Oh, hello, are you talking too? Yes, you like it here too, don't you, sweetheart?
It's beautiful.
So this would be naturally the end of our walk, and what we like to do is capture a picture, a memory. Just focus on one particular image that really strikes you.
Yeah, it'd have to be that tree.
Yes,
wouldn't it?
I can understand why. And then if you close your eyes, once you've captured that image, what we're now going to do is add in all the senses that we've learnt about. So for a moment, we're just going to listen to the sounds. Then what we're going to do is we're going to feel the air against our skin.
The air's very soft today, isn't it?
And we're just getting that extra bit of movement now.
Yeah.
And then open your eyes. Look at the picture you took, your visual picture. So you've got this visual image, but we've added in all the other senses that we've explored today.
And before today, what I'll be taking home with me is just this wonderful autumn colour. But now, after your wonderful tour, I'm going to be taking home so much more. Thank you so much. And thank you, Axel.
I think everybody gets that sense of awe and wonder from trees. Now, here in the greenhouse, there are a few things that have come through really quickly in the last few weeks. This is the Desampsia that we sowed, and it looks just like normal grass, but each one of these will form a plant that will look really good. The broad beans, they're coming up. And these are the salvia cuttings that I took a few weeks ago, and now they're ready to pot on. I took these cuttings as a kind of insurance policy because Salvia fulgens is not hardy. And I know that they've rooted because there's new growth. There are even little flower buds appearing, which actually I want to remove. So I will pinch these out, and pinching out the tops of cuttings will encourage it to be bushy anyway. Now I've mixed up a fairly well-drained mix for salvias, so I added more perlite than I might normally do. And then just tip these out. And this is obviously the moment of truth. There we are. Here are the roots in there. And so what I need to do is just gently pull them apart. So we've got one there. And I will just put that in, holding it up, and just throw some soil around it. Give it a slight shake, and that's fine. You don't want to firm the soil hard around these little hair-like roots, which are so fragile. So I'm trying to tease the roots apart rather than break them. Right, I'll label those, water them, and keep them in a frost-free place. Probably a corner of the greenhouse will be ideal. They don't need to be watered very much over winter. Salvias, by and large, need to be kept pretty dry in the winter months. And that means probably watering them at most once every 2 or 3 weeks. And then, as we go into spring, they can be given a little bit of water, maybe some feed. And if they're growing very strongly, I will pot them on again so they don't get root bound, because they won't be able to be planted out into the garden until after the last frost. And to be really safe, that could be as late as the end of May. Now, there are an increasing number of people who are gardening indoors, and they're doing so with great skill and getting a lot of pleasure from it. And we went to meet one such gardener in London.
I love terrarium making because when I'm sitting down making a terrarium, I see it almost as a mindfulness practice. You can have a huge variety of environments within your own home. You can go from the jungle to the desert without even leaving your own living room. And it's that playing with scale that I love. So that whole sort of Alice in Wonderland type thing where things are either really big or really small. And I love that you can create these miniature worlds within these glass vessels. My name is Shilpa Reddy, and these are my terrariums. I'm a doctor turned florist. I was a consultant in anaesthesia. And then just one day I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. It literally was that sudden. But I lived in quite a small urban environment at the time. And terrariums really were a way of bringing the green in. So a terrarium is a combination of soil and plants in a glass container, usually split into 2 broad groups. So you've got open and closed. Open terrariums, they're open at the top. You can support a wide variety of plants growing in them, so most standard house plants. However, you do need to be aware that they don't have the drainage holes at the bottom like your standard house plant pots would. So with a closed terrarium, it's a self-contained ecosystem. The water stays within the system. So plants transpire, water condenses against the glass surface, and it's then reabsorbed by the plants. It's really easy to make your first closed terrarium. All you need is a sealable glass jar like this. And we're going to start with the first layer, which is the gravel layer. Add the gravel in. Gravel isn't just to make your terrarium look attractive, it also acts as a water sink. So if you accidentally overwater your plants, the water sinks through to the bottom of the gravel layer and stays there until your terrarium's nice and dry again and should re-evaporate. Layer number 2 is activated charcoal. This is charcoal that's been heat treated to give it a larger surface area for chemical reactions and has a sort of anti-mold and mildew effect. I'm going to go for approximately an inch worth of compost in my glass jar. Because this is a closed terrarium, I've chosen plants that like this type of humid environment. So I've got here Pilea. I'm going to dunk the entire root ball of the plant into the water, and I'm going to keep it in there until I don't see air bubbles rising to the surface. And I'm just going to drop the plant in using my hands to plant it. I'm just going to tamp down the compost just so the plant feels nice and stable. I don't want my plants to be too crowded together, so what I'm going to do here is separate out these individual shoots from this Fittonia, and I'm going to put just a single shoot in. I'm also adding this carpet moss. Tricks your mind into thinking that the other plants look a bit like trees, so it creates that illusion of a mini world. And there you are. So a great room for a closed terrarium is a bathroom, because bathroom windows tend to have frosted glass. They allow the sunlight in, it's nice and bright, but you're not getting direct beams of sunlight hitting your terrarium.
It doesn't seem so very long ago when terraria were about the least fashionable aspect of horticulture. So it's good to see them back. And of course, what it means, as Shilpa showed us, is that you don't need a garden, you don't need access to a garden to enjoy the full range and richness that gardening can bring you. Now this pot is going to host a really good display of tulips. And if you've got a container of any kind, you can give them exactly the conditions they like, because above all, tulips like good drainage. Now I get this by mixing up a coir base, but bark base would do just as well, compost and horticultural grit 50-50. Now that is very gritty. So mix them up. Although horticultural grit is not cheap, it can be recycled. So I will use this for the tulips. When they've finished, I will then tip this onto the vegetable garden. So the vegetable garden drainage improves, and because it's grit, it won't break down and it's permanent. Right, this will be plenty for this pot. So a crock. Tulips should be planted quite deep. Now I'm going to grow 2 different tulips in this pot, chosen for the fact that they will contrast with each other and have real vibrancy. The first is called Ronaldo. This is a rich, dark purple, and I'm going to marry it with Princess Irene, which is an orange. And I'll plant up 2 pots so they can flank a path, steps, a door. It's a brilliant way of using tulips. Now, we're going to start with Ronaldo first. When you buy bulbs, the bigger the bulb, the better. A really nice, big, strong bulb will give you a nice, big, strong flower and plant. And they can go fairly close. You can pack them in. Again, we're going for this explosion of colour. So we'll cover those over. And now the orange Princess Irene. And the fact that the Ronaldo are planted deeper than the Princess Irene doesn't mean much in terms of flowering time. Might make the difference of a day or 2, but it's far more significant the variety you choose. All tulips are grouped together. These are from the Triumph group, and there's the lily-flowered group, and then the parrots. If you choose them from the same group, then they will flower at the same time, even if they're planted at different depths. We'll cover these over. Now, having covered them, I will dress them with some grit. And I think this is important for any container with bulbs in it, because if you have compost that gets wet and then dries out, there is a slight risk that you get this hard crust, and that can make it more difficult for the growing tips to break through. And finally, it looks good. Now this can sit outside. As long as it doesn't get too wet, these tulips will be absolutely fine however cold it gets. And there's no huge rush to do this. The best time to plant tulips is November, and it's fine to do it any time up to Christmas. Time now to visit one of your gardens, and it belongs to Sam Hancock's, and he lives in London.
Hey Gardeners World, welcome to my lovely garden down here in southwest London. It is in a new build estate, so there's a block of flats behind us and lots of other houses in quite close proximity to each other. My garden is also north facing, so on one side we get glorious sunshine all throughout the day, and on the other side is in complete shade. On the sunny side, you can see lots of glorious plants coming through, so great opportunity for us to be able to grow clematises. This one over here just starting to come into flower, which is going to look amazing. We've got an absolutely glorious range of aces and some bluebells that are absolutely just starting to come through, just look incredible. One tip that I wanted to show you that I tried this winter is when everything died back down, I put in kebab skewers, just dotted them in any area that had any gaps. And what that's allowed me to do is kind of know where is the right place to be able to put in any new plants that I bought right at the start of spring. And I think for a north-facing garden, at the end of the day, it's all about how you use the light to your advantage to be able to create privacy, but also to create amazing displays throughout all of the seasons.
Well, I think Sam shows there that even if your garden is heavily shaded by neighbouring buildings, and quite a few urban gardens are, you can still make them look beautiful. Now, what I'm doing here is planting last year's tulips, grown in containers, into the orchard as part of the flowering meadow. Tulips don't repeat flower very well. Some are better than others, but by and large, the display is going to get less vibrant. They'll be less big, and very often they won't flower at all. They'll be blind. So what we do is empty them out and select the largest bulbs, but we will put them here into the orchard to get a really vibrant spring display in amongst the tall grasses. Now, if you're going to plant any bulb of any kind into grass, by far the best technique is to take a handful and just simply throw them onto the ground and plant them wherever they land. It'll look much more natural than if you try and place them. If you're planting a lot of bulbs too, you can use a trowel for a few, but get yourself a stout, strong bulb planter. It'll last for years. You simply take out a plug like that, pop the bulb in, and then the next one right next to it, and that pushes up a really clean core, and pop it over the first one. Of course, by adding tulips to a meadow, it ceases to be anything like a wildflower meadow. But if you focus your meadow on bulbs, you can then cut it in late June or early July, and you then revert to shorter grass. There are many different ways of using the concept of a meadow and ordinary garden plants. And personally, I love the effect of the tulips. Now, still to come on today's programme. We go to Tinsfield to celebrate their spectacular seasonal pumpkin harvest.
We've been working, sowing, planting and growing all these vegetables for the harvest display, which is all down to me, but yeah, I'm quite excited about it.
And we meet an allotmenteer in Yorkshire who has adapted her plot for maximum productivity.
Planted spinach, which has gone mad. I'm using my tomatoes. Anybody can grow a little seed and have something out of it.
But first, I'm sure you're aware that the BBC is celebrating its centenary. And gardening's been an important part of its output throughout the whole of those 100 years. So we thought that we would look back and see how gardening on television has evolved over the last century. Britain has long had a deep love of gardens and gardening. Fashions in horticulture have changed over the years, and gardening on television and radio has had a strong influence on the way that we shape our gardens. The roots of this broadcasting genre began in 1931, when Cecil Henry Middleton, always known as Mr. Middleton, became the first radio gardening broadcaster on In Your Garden.
Pruning is sometimes very desirable and necessary, but it can also do more harm than good, and often does. Some people can't leave the trees alone.
Television gardening began in 1936 with Mr. Middleton and In the Garden, which was broadcast from a purpose-built set at Alexandra Palace. Then came Gardening Club, and the man who came to be known as the nation's head gardener, Percy Thrower.
Good afternoon and welcome once again to our Gardening Club.
In 1968, he became the first lead presenter of Gardener's World. Gardening on television was now in full colour. Percy also started the tradition of presenting the programme from his own home garden. Arthur Billett carried on the lead role. He was then joined by Peter Seabrook. They presented the programme in tandem.
But just catch a sight of that arboriculture, isn't it magnificent?
Then followed the long tenure of Jeff Hamilton.
Nothing grandiose, because on this sort of scale, simplicity is all important.
In the 1980s, Mary Spiller became the first female presenter on the show.
The best thing to do is to take a few pots and fill them with compost.
Alan Titchmarsh took over the reins in 1997, bringing his own style to the programme.
Cutting edge hurts your fingers, doesn't it? I like to see plants well used, sometimes traditionally.
And in 2003, after Alan moved on, I took over.
I'm very proud to be leading gardening's longest-running series. Do you know it's now in its 36th year?
We began with a new garden at Berryfields in Warwickshire, with Rachel and Chris Beardshaw helping me out.
Well, this area's got lots of potential, hasn't it? You know, there's
it's the estate agent coming in.
No, there is.
And there were a few thrills and spills along the way.
That was going to happen, wasn't it?
In 2011, the programme moved to my own garden, Longmeadow.
This is a new chapter for Gardener's World, but obviously it's my home.
And many new faces have joined the team.
But within our garden, there's a whole other domain that has barely been explored.
It's rather like a lasagna. First we've got the layer of cardboard, then I'm going to add a layer of wood chip, then I'm going to add the mushroom spawn.
It's edible, it's medicinal, but also it's really good for pollinators, particularly hoverflies.
With passionate growers, garden designers.
It does amaze me the amount of times people take on a garden and they don't test the soil.
Plant collectors.
Sorry, I'm turning into Bridget Jones now.
And of course, our viewers' gardens.
The strawberry walk has a lot of advantages.
All bringing fresh ideas and experience.
And what you'll have is massive roots appearing at the base there.
This pleached hornbeam frames the view of the ornamental garden beyond.
The changes in us as a nation are reflected in the changes to the way that we care for and use our gardens. We're moving from this...
That means that we've got to spray, and spray fairly regularly.
...to this.
It reminds me of a Vivienne Westwood mohair throw.
But there is one constant factor.
We turn the soil over, breaking it up.
And that is our deep love of gardens and gardening. and long may that last. Well, I won't be here in 100 years' time, but I bet you that our descendants are gardening with the same pleasure and passion that we all do. Now, the dahlias have had a strange year here at Longmeadow. Normally, they're a stalwart of the jewel garden. They start flowering at the end of July, hit their peak round about September, and then carry on till the first frost comes. That didn't happen at all this year. We planted them out in May, all right, and they started to grow, but there was hardly any flowering at all until August, and then not very much. But now they are beginning to flower months after we would normally expect them to, and they're looking great. A little touch of frost hit them the other day, and that's blackened some of the leaves and the flowers, but keep going. Don't cut them back just because they've got a little bit of frost. And in fact, when the whole of the top growth is black and dying down, it won't have killed the plant. Then you can decide whether to leave them in the ground and mulch them or lift them as we do and store them. But hopefully that will be a few weeks yet. Come on. Now, last week, I suggested that a good job was to clean a greenhouse to prepare it for wrapping with bubble wrap to insulate it over the winter. And that's exactly what we've done here. And this does two things. Obviously, it protects the plants, but also it dramatically reduces the cost of heating it. This is bubble wrap we've had for about 6 or 7 years, and it comes out every year. And it's held in place simply by bamboo canes, and we found that this is actually the most effective method. It's very simple, but it works. This greenhouse is lovely because it's so big. However, it's a nightmare to heat. So what I've done is make this. And by the way, this affair here is to stop Ned digging up the plants. This is a hot box, and it's created from fleece and bubble wrap and clothes pegs. So you can see if I undo the clothes pegs, what we have is a little area that is bubble wrapped against the glass and across the top so light can get in. And then we've got a double layer of fleece just folded over a cane, hanging down, and we can close it up with the clothes pegs. And this will just raise the temperature up a few degrees. And that means that plants like the salvias, like citrus if you want to, maybe even bananas, can go in there. They'll be nice and snug in the winter. And if you do have to heat this particular area, you're doing it from a higher base, and that will save you a lot of money. And of course, the beauty is all this can be packed away and reused year after year. Here in the Paradise Garden, the bus shelter, as we call it, is a peaceful place from spring through till October. But in the winter months, we don't use it at all. And then we had the idea that if we insulated it, it could be really good storage for a certain range of plants. So what we've done is build a framework and then lined that with this thick insulating board. And then it becomes a really good storage place for plants like citrus. The biggest mistake with citrus when you're storing them is to bring them into the house. It's too warm and too dry. What they like is cool, humid air and quite dark. And then they go dormant. And you don't water them. And with enough light with the doors open on all but the coldest days to give them the light they need, they will be fine. And any shed will do the job. Use your sheds to store plants in. If you insulate them, you'll barely have to heat them, and that will save you a lot of money and be great for the plants. It's time now to visit one of your gardens, and this is an allotment in Yorkshire.
Hi, I'm Maggie Boyd and I live in a place called Knaresborough, and last October I was given an allotment and I'm so excited and I want to show you what I'm growing and the sort of things that I've done. So I've been gardening for quite a number of years, and my old bungalow I used to have raised beds made, but then when I moved to a little cottage in the middle of Knaresborough I don't have a massive garden. My love for plants are still here. I had these 2 smaller beds made, which is better for a wheelchair user, in which I've planted spinach, which has gone mad. I've got to cut it right back. That's something I'm going to have to do. I've planted some butternut squash, and there's a melon. There's raspberries and there's strawberries, and there's some little cauliflowers, which were savaged by pigeons, but are pulling through. I'm using my tomatoes, some Mazzanos. They're like a plum tomato. They've gone absolutely mad. And sweet corn right at the end in here, as you can see. Everyone's gone a bit mad. This is a spaghetti squash, apparently. The seeds are planted were supposed to be butternut squash, but as you can see, it's spaghetti. So I planted these arches here, and I've done them really low. They're a bit faffy. I did it all myself. Grew them. So from a wheelchair point of view, you can get an idea of growing things, and people have to stoop down. Just makes people think. But then gardening should be open for everybody. We finished the pond. I've sourced some stone, and I've also found some more dead trees that I can put round. It also encourages wildlife, like for insects and things. All the beds here, when I take things out, I'm going to be putting something called green manure in it. So you just literally sow the seed, and you allow nature to take its course. And hopefully next year I'll be ready for another crop of vegetables and flowers. I hope you've enjoyed looking around my plot. I hope I've inspired you. I'd be really pleased if I have, because anybody can grow a little seed and have something out of it. Take care.
Well, thanks, Maggie. And there's no doubt about it that there is something for anybody and everybody in an allotment. I just wish there were more, so that everybody had access to one. Although this is the last programme in this series, we still want to receive the films of your gardens. The website will stay open all winter with full instructions. So send us your gardens in the middle of winter. That'll be great. And we'll enjoy them and share them next spring. Now, I can't imagine gardening without vegetables. And I love chicory, so I grow a lot of chicory. I've got 3 different types at the moment, plus endive, and this time of year is when they really come into their own. But the radicchio have a strange growing pattern, because throughout summer and into early autumn, they grow a lot of blousy green leaves, but they're very bitter. However, that feeds the root, and then the root will develop the familiar red leaves. And these, which are the last to come, you can see that the red is beginning to appear. But there is a risk, if you leave the green leaves on, that in wet weather they get soggy, collapse and fall on the red ones, rot down, and at best is not very appetizing, and at worst will rot the red growth underneath. So what you need to do at this time of year is just remove all the green leaves. Now, luckily, they pull off very easily. And that will also let light and air in, which will help. This is not something, actually, you have to do in one go. You can do it by degrees. As the red develops, just keep removing the green leaves. Now, the National Trust property of Tinsfield in North Somerset have been preparing for their autumnal celebrations. So we went along to pay them a visit.
Autumn is the busiest time of year. The whole year's been building up towards now, where we've got our harvest display coming together and using all of our produce that we've been caring for through the year. My name's Anna Parker. I work in the kitchen garden and I've been here for just over a year now. Since I started, we've been working, sowing, planting and growing all these vegetables for the harvest display, which is all down to me, but yeah, I'm quite excited about it. It's just really nice to show off all the different things that we've got growing here that we can use. Our pumpkins and squashes are going to be the real star of the show. We've grown 39 varieties. I'm just really hoping that I've grown enough that we're going to fill the space. This here is Jilby Little, so this one's a really lovely variety to have in a small garden. So really yummy, but also a lovely little pumpkin shape. And these are perfectly ripe now. And what you want to do is make sure you've got plenty of stems. So you've got the original stem, but then also a little bit of the vine. And if there's any rotting off, it doesn't affect your stalk here. 2 little munchkin pumpkins. So there can be a bit of confusion between what is a pumpkin and what is a squash, but actually they're all essentially squashes. Pumpkins, generally, we're growing them for their size, their colour and their shape, so they're easy to carve. Whereas we're really working towards making the tastiest squash, so all for eating. And you don't really have to peel squashes, they've got quite tender skin, so you can roast it, you can cook it, and you can get away with eating the skin. This one here is a variety called Victor. Doesn't look much on the outside, but inside we've got a really yummy sweet flesh. We have the Sibley winter storage. As that one cures, it's going to get much sweeter. We also have the turban squash, and that one is a great portion size. So you can just chop off the top, stuff it with your favourite stuffing and roast it. Right, this is what we call a pumpkin. So this variety here is Big Max. Now this one's very traditional. We also have ones like this, a nice white pumpkin, so this will keep its colour as it cures. This one's called Polar Bear, still edible and would make a nice carving. So all of our pumpkins and squashes are all ready for harvesting now, but whether you're carving them, whether you're keeping them for cooking, they all need to go through a curing process. So that means they need sunlight on their skin. That's going to help them colour up if they're not already a nice bright orange colour. Also, we don't want them to be outside if it's really, really wet in the mud because they'll start to rot. Right, so I think we've grown a lot more than I thought we had, so that's good. So it's not just pumpkins and squash we'll have in the display this year. I'd really love to have some flowers in there as well.
Hi, I'm April. I'm the cutting gardener. I am looking to cut some flowers ready for the autumn display, which I'm helping Anna with. So we're going to pick some flowers now, and then we're going to dry them in the potting shed, and then I'm using them to make a wreath. These are Chrysanthemum Yellow Penne Oriole. I think the bright yellow would be amazing in the drying process because I think it is going to hold that pigment quite nicely. First thing I'm looking for is for the bloom to be perfect. So all the petals should be properly aligned and there should be no damage from pest or diseases. Helenium is an amazing cut flower, but it's also brilliant for drying, and a lot of people might not realise that you can dry it. So this is Zinnia Benari Giant Wine. I really love this variety because it's got a nice fullness that the standard zinnia don't have, so it's like really pom-pomish, if that's a word. So there we go. And I will be looking to cut them as low down as possible so that I can keep the stems long, because if I need to shorten them I can, but I can't lengthen them. So another thing I love about this variety, and all varieties of zinnia, are the buds. So you can see that the outer casing looks like dragon scales, and I think that would be amazing to dry as well.
Oh my gosh, that looks incredible. That's gonna look amazing. Right, so we've got everything harvested now, and it's just a bit of a waiting game until we can put it all together. So for now, I've got some onions to plat and some borlotti beans to pod. I really just hope it all comes together. Right, today's the day. All the squashes are cured, so now we just need to get the display started.
No, isn't it amazing? It's of different colours and shapes. Wow! Just look at that.
Oh, that is incredible. Look at that big one in the crate up there.
I think it's turned out to be a success.
Massive success. I'm really pleased.
Great.
You've done a good job.
Looks brilliant.
Yeah. Now just to start planning next year.
Come on, don't even go there.
My own pumpkins have been curing here in the greenhouse. They're now ready for storage. And to store them so they keep their best should be between 10 and 15 degrees in a dark place. And they should last for about 3 to 6 months. Now, this is the big moment when we take stock of the loofahs. I sowed these loofahs in spring, hoping that as many of you as possible would join in. And I confess this was the first time I've grown loofahs, so this has been a journey of discovery for me, as I suspect it has been for many of you. Now, I had thought and expected they'd be ready for harvest by now, but that isn't the case. You can see this is nice and hard, which is a good sign, but it's very green. And what you want to look for is a change of colour. You can see in this one it's beginning. Up the top, that is going from green to brown. Now, the ideal time to harvest loofahs is when the foliage has died back and turned brown, and the fruits are also gone from green to brown. Now, I do know that when you harvest them, you need to remove the skin. I've read that some people will do it with a knife, other people will soak them. But if you soak them, you may have to soak them for weeks. So be a bit patient. And you remove the seeds, and what you're left with is the familiar fibrous shape, which makes a perfect back scratcher for the bath. I can tell you, somebody is going to be getting a loofah as a Christmas present. And you can see lots of small loofahs. However, these small ones will inhibit the ripening of the bigger ones, so we can cut them all off. There's one down there, and there's one here. What I have got, as well as loads of loofahs, is fantastic cucumbers. This has been the best cucumber year I've ever had, and I've been growing them for 50 years. And here we are at the end of October, and we're still producing new fruits. So we'll leave the loofahs, but I think collect a few cucumbers. Now, it's time for your jobs, but as it's the last programme, I'll be kind. You don't have to do them this weekend. Here are some jobs for the winter. Paperwhite daffodils are not hardy, but will flower indoors very quickly if planted now. Use a free-draining compost and plant them shallowly, so that the shoots are just level with the surface. Then put them somewhere warm and bright, and they'll flower within 6 weeks. If you want to delay flowering for any reason, start them off somewhere cool and dark. If you're planting bulbs into terracotta pots this winter, give them a good scrub before you do so. This is not so much to clean them, but to make sure that there are no bacterial, fungal or viral problems that can be passed on to the bulbs. Any containers with plants growing in them left outside all winter should be raised up now to improve drainage. This will mean that the plants don't get waterlogged and also protect the pots, because the wetter the compost is, the more likely it is to expand in cold weather and break precious and valuable pots. Well, this has been an interesting year for us gardeners, because of course we've all shared the experience of extreme drought. And I have to say, here at Longmeadow, that's a novel one. We've never had drought in the 30 years that I've been here. And the results, of course, have affected all of us. Now, I started this year with high hopes and great expectations and new projects. So I'd widened the borders and the orchard beds, thinking I'd plant a series of shrubs that would enjoy the light shade and the slightly damp soil. Well, the damp soil very quickly dried out, so I've had to change my mind about that. I made a bog garden, and actually I thought looked really good up until mid-May, but then there was no rain, and the bog garden became a dry garden. And here in the Jewel Garden, the centre of Longmeadow, its beating heart, if you like, it started the year out as normal, rather bare, and then in April you start to get the foliage coming through and the hedges prickle with leaf, and then in May you get the alliums flowering, the purple sensation, and you have the hops with a yellowy colour and the glaucus of the cardoons, and in June it bursts into full flower and full flush. But this year, by mid-July, it was starting to fade. The sunflowers didn't do anything. The dahlias were really late to come through. The poor bananas didn't grow at all. And it has never hit the heights that I would expect. And the truth is that the climate is changing and our gardens have to change along with it. Now, I've got good news, because although we're coming to the end of this series, we have 4 special programs going out every Friday night this December.
The whole place is just bursting with the most glorious combinations, the most beautiful colours.
I've come here for some autumn inspiration.
It's like the last hurrah of summer.
Oh, I'm so excited. OK, right, let's start making.
I'm so lucky. This is a beautiful light today. I have to say, what a day to visit this garden.
But of course, the biggest change that's happened in our lives here at Longmeadow is the arrival of Ned. He's growing by the day. When we come back in spring, he'll no longer be a puppy. He'll be a gangly teenager. He and Patty do get on, but she's still in charge, I think. Don't forget that the clocks go back this weekend, so we'll lose our evenings, but we will gain a little bit of light in the mornings. And myself, the dogs, and all the Gardeners World team will be back early next spring. So until then, bye-bye.